So we will do a 10-minute question and answer, but I think that these talks really had a great linkage, which showed brain circulation with people from the diaspora going back and then also highlighting Africans as producers of knowledge and not just us as consumers. So again, thank you for the talks. These were all really invited speakers, and I think they did a really good job in highlighting that point. Like I said, this next portion will be up for question and answer, so if you guys have any questions for the panel, we'll take them now.
I thank the group. I think we are getting at least the other side of the story, and the innovativeness they have shown in their endeavors. Question goes to Dr. Yeah, one of the challenges I found was what in our NGO work and all the work we do in the community is we tend to forget the men in our programming. And when you pointed out in your programming, I think there's need to have at least a target for men. The reason why I say men is because we find that in the community, in most communities in our countries, men are very, very ignorant, and yet most NGOs are putting more effort on educating women, and they forget that the person who who is supposed to be in charge in that community is the man. And you bring that difference you create in the community, and it all comes back to women being suppressed in the community, because most men are not aware of what they're doing. And actually, what I'm driving at is that when we are setting up, designing programs, let's also have at least an indicator where we have men enlightened, men coming on board. For example, if you have an indicator of how many men take their women to the hospital. I asked that to one of the people who was having a gender conference, and how many? And then it wasn't in their program. So that is something I'm always driving at. If you're looking at gender, let's also target men, because they are not informed. Yeah, I look at myself. Myself is an example. When I'm planning, I have to plan that my wife has to go to school also before I plan for myself. Just because I'm armed, that makes me that I don't have to suppress my wife. She has also her opportunities to look at, not only to look after my children, but also to look at her family, her goals, and also look at also the family goals. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't hear your name. Richard. Thank you for making that comment. Actually, maybe three points in response. One, we came in to try to just directly help the women. That's not to say that we're not interested in helping men, but our target populations are impoverished pregnant women, as well as their children and the elderly, which can include men. And a lot of the times, the women that we're helping may not have that support in place. But that's not to say that in our work, men are not involved. I had a few pictures that will translate to the presentation of male doctors giving checkups, and male priests and male church officials helping us do our work. So men are very much involved in the work that we do, as far as those that are volunteering and helping to deliver the services. But I think my last point is that it would be really wonderful if we could identify a way to reach out to men and to inspire a sense of agency in in them to support their wives. And given the cultural context that we're dealing with, I would love to hear ideas on how to do that. Because I'm not a man, right? But at the same time, I love to empower and inspire people, including men, which includes men and women and others. And so what I would love to know is, how do you motivate someone to do something that you would normally assume they should do, right? How do you motivate someone to say, well, you know, I know you don't want to pay for your wife to take a taxi to the hospital, but she's about to deliver a child. What can you do to inspire a sense of agency in that person? So I guess I'm going to flip it back.
Okay, so you guys can continue your conversations at lunch, and we're going to take another question.
So, my name is Festus Amadou for the Medical Mission Trade, Doctor from, I can't remember pronounce the name. Chichi, okay. So, I guess two questions. One is, how do you define the target, the women, those who are most in need? What's the criteria, which criteria do you use? That's one. Then two, do you have a monitoring and maybe evaluation mechanism in place for the resources? You know, you say it's non-profit, so you receive funds and you take it over there. Yeah. How can someone from outside actually evaluate what you guys are doing, the effectiveness of it? You know, impact assessment, right?
Right.
So that's the background coming from. Then question for Natasha about Sierra Leone. Interestingly, I'm from Sierra Leone, so that was very good. My question is, did you experience or did you actually see the level of inequality? You gave some data about like the per capita GDP, which is actually very reflective of what's going on. But the measure of inequality, did you do you have any data on that, or did you see anything about that? And also, like in comparison to what obtains in the US or other so-called developed countries? Thanks.
Okay, so criteria for encouragement, I think for the most part we don't have a very strict criteria, mostly because we work with the parish priest to identify individuals who are in need. So we're not just going up to random people and saying, hey, we have medical services for you. Often the women are recruited through the church, and those individuals are known by the priest on site. It would be great if we had some kind of formalized mechanism, but working in this environment, it's very much a work as you can and make it happen as you go along kind of process. And so ideally, there are no income tax forms that we're using to evaluate whether or not someone is poor. We're using the reputations that we know through the priests. But then a lot of the people, my parents also know to be impoverished. And so I think that's kind of where we're going there. In terms of evaluation and assessment tools, we're now building in consent forms and mechanisms to formally enroll patients. A lot of the work that we've done has been kind of just building inroads and doing a lot of work to figure out a process that's going to effectively deliver services. What we'd love to do is create an evaluation tool. If you're offering, that'd be great. It would be a volunteer effort, but we would love to kind of evaluate the efforts, the impact of our intervention. And when I quote the 212 number, this is really since over the last 3 years. So we've been able to do so much in a very short amount of time. And a lot of it is just building the process so that we can come back and do the evaluation.
In regard to your question about did I see inequality in Sierra Leone, yes. The rural areas, there's not access to very many things. They don't have access to healthcare, electricity, all the kind of things that are more easily accessible in the urban areas of the country. I did not have the opportunity to speak to people about their experiences in that and how they felt about that, what they were looking to do to move the country forward in addressing that inequality, which from my research, what seemed to be one of the driving factors behind the Civil War was the inequality and people trying to make sure that the economic development and growth that was happening in Sierra Leone was not only for the people that have access to that or were in the capital cities, but we're trickling down to the rural areas as well and helping them with that. And then you asked as far as like in comparison to the United States and inequality there. Country to country, I think that when we're looking at things like comparing Sierra Leone and the United States, we need to think differently about it. The African culture is very different than the culture of the United States. I think it's something that we need to deeply appreciate. The values there are different. It's more of an emphasis on family, and there's emphasis building relationships, which I think has fallen to the wayside in this country. And I think those things are greatly beneficial for that culture and would also be beneficial for here. So in terms of economics, yes, the United States is much more, which I'm trying to find ways to use different terms than we use because I'm trying to contextualize things differently, but until I can figure out another way to say it, the United States is more economically developed. But I don't think that's always an indicator of the level of life satisfaction that people have for where they live.
Last question will be for Dr. Potter.
So thanks to everybody in the panel here. This question goes to Natasha. I really applaud, everything you said here, and I can see that the study abroad experiences have had the kind of impact that we want these programs to have on students. Now, see yourself as somebody who may be speaking for some people, because one of the things we're trying to do is try to attract more students who look like you into study abroad programs, and we know that that's not very easy. So can you talk about some of the challenges that students encounter, and also if you were to talk to people in the institution, what would you ask them to do in order to increase the numbers of students, mainly African Americans, into study programs to Africa? Thank you.
Yeah, so how to increase the numbers of African American students interested in going to Africa. I'll say I know many African American students will travel to South Africa, but that's about the extent of where they're willing to go in Africa. They can Google that and see, oh, South Africa is kind of like the United States. I'm willing to go there, that sounds cool. I think one of the biggest challenges is just educating people like we're doing right now about the myths and realities of the African continent. When I told some of my friends that I was going to Sierra Leone, like I said, they're like, oh my gosh, you're gonna die. You're never gonna come back. You're like literally gonna be killed. Do you know what those people over there do? And I was like, have you guys ever opened a book? Like, have you even Googled what's going on in Sierra Leone right now? It's 2014. The stuff that you saw on TV is like from the 1990s and 1980s. That's not what's going on over there. And so I think just really making sure we have spaces to have those discussions about the realities of Africa and combating all of the negative stereotypes that are being portrayed in the media about the continent, and letting people know there's so much more to Africa than what you're going to get from being here in the United States. Yeah, and just when people do go, making sure they have opportunities to talk about their experiences. I would say if you all have money, like Tohib was talking about, if you could start a small business and sponsor somebody to go to Africa, provide a financial scholarship for that. It can be pretty expensive. My trip for 17 days was about $4,000. That's a lot of money, and a lot of African American students come from urban areas like Chicago where they don't have access to money like that to be able to afford these programs. So that is another hindrance. People may want to go, but financially they're inhibited from going. So yeah, I guess those would be my main two suggestions.
Give a round of applause one more time for our excited speakers. A couple of notes. 2050 is right around the corner, and that is where we'll be serving our lunch. Also, we'll start right back up. I'm trying to look at the time on, not my cell phone, but at 1 o'clock. So if you could grab your food and eat it at 2050. Food isn't really allowed in this room. We really appreciate it. And I think those are all the notes that I have for now. So see you at 1 o'clock.
Yes. Okay, that's good. Wonderful. I will send that. Actually,